Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiridulwale. The headlines. The Kremlin says it is considering further steps to take after its allegation Britain attacked the Nordstream pipeline. Ukrainian Air Force says it has no effective defense against ballistic missiles it alleges Iran plans to ship to Russia. And French President Emmanuel Macron pledges support for Ukraine to get through the winter. The Kremlin says it is considering what, quote, further steps to take in response to its allegation that Britain was responsible for an attack on the Nord Stream undersea gas pipelines. Russia's defense ministry said in a statement that British Navy personnel had blown up the gas pipelines in September, an assertion that London said was false and designed to distract from Russia's military failures in Ukraine. The Kremlin has also now said no decision had been taken on whether to repair the Russian-owned pipelines. Meanwhile, Ukrainian military intelligence said Iran is planning to send more than 200 combat drones to Russian forces, including Iran's new combat drone, the Arash-2. Defense intelligence of Ukraine, part of its defense ministry, says, quote, a batch of more than 200 combat drones, Shahid 136, Mohajer 6, and Arash-2 are planned to be sent from Iran to the Russian Federation at the start of November. The intelligence agency also says the unmanned aerial vehicles will be delivered via the Caspian Sea to the port of Astrakhan, adding that the drones were being shipped in a disassembled state, and once inside Russian territory, they will be collected, repainted, and applied with Russian markings. And the Ukrainian Air Force says it is currently having no effective defense against the types of ballistic missiles that Iran is, according to it, preparing to ship to Russia to use in its war against Ukraine. Yuri Inat, spokesperson for the Ukrainian Air Force Command, says the range of the Iranian ballistic missiles being supplied, with one having over 300 kilometers, the other over 700 kilometers, will allow Russian forces to strike anywhere inside Ukraine. However, Mr. Inat warns that the country currently has no effective defense against these missiles and appealed for Western help. U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price says Russia's attacks on Ukrainian water and energy supplies are aimed at exacerbating human suffering and are particularly heinous. Russia fired a huge volley of missiles at Ukrainian cities this week in what Russian President Vladimir Putin called retaliation for an attack on Russia's Black Sea Fleet last weekend. Ukraine said it shot most of those missiles down, but some had hit power stations, knocking out electricity and water supplies.
Russia has launched nearly 100 missiles attacking Ukraine's water and energy supplies. With temperatures dropping, these Russian attacks aimed at exacerbating human suffering are particularly heinous. As Ukraine works to restore water and power to its citizens, the United States remains committed to the victory of a sovereign and independent Ukraine, and we are working to deliver air defense systems so Ukraine can continue to repel these attacks. We are concerned that Russia may also seek to acquire advanced conventional weapons from Iran, such as surface-to-surface missiles that will almost certainly be used to support Russia's war against Ukraine. This was a partnership that has existed, but clearly the Iranian regime is taking steps to deepen that partnership. Clearly, Russia is in pretty dire straits now, certainly more desperate for partners that it otherwise may not have pursued.
In the meantime, the United States will use every relevant and appropriate tool in our toolkit to expose, to confront, and to counter Iran's provision of weapons to Russia. Speaking at the State Department briefing, Ned Price, who you saw there, says the U.S. has taken aim at Iran's unmanned aerial vehicle proliferation networks over the course of months, saying, quote, we are concerned that Russia may also seek to acquire advanced conventional weapons from Iran, such as surface-to-surface missiles that will almost certainly be used to support Russia's war against Ukraine. The spokesperson added that the United States will vigorously enforce all sanctions on both Russian and Iranian arms trade to make it harder for Iran to sell these weapons to Russia. The European Union Energy Commissioner, Kadri Simpson, says the EU is exploring ways to increase help for Ukraine's energy sector following Russian attacks that have caused widespread power cuts. Visiting Kyiv to show solidarity with Ukraine after Russia stepped up its missile attacks on Ukrainian power facilities in recent weeks, Ms. Simpson said foreign companies should be urged to prioritize the transfer of energy equipment to Ukraine.
Russia has been specifically targeting Iranian energy infrastructure. Clearly, a tactic to increase human suffering as the winter is approaching. I had the opportunity to discuss this situation also with President Zelensky earlier today. Russia's behavior is cruel and inhumane, but not surprising. We have seen Russia disregarding international law and moral norms, not only since the beginning of the war, but already before. As the Russian attacks on the energy system have escalated, we need also to step up our support, and I have witnessed the scale of destruction in Ukraine firsthand, and I'm making all efforts to increase financial, technical, and also practical help. This has to come from the EU, from our institutions, from our member states, but also from our international partners and also private donors. After cascades of missile attacks, the need for spare parts is so big that there is no storage available to deliver them on spot. But we do have companies who do have bits and pieces of for their own consumption, and now this logistics that we are offering to support you is also dedicated to the outreach of these companies who do have some for their own need.
Authorities in Kyiv say water and power supplies have now been restored a day after a wave of Russian attacks on the Ukrainian capital's infrastructure. Announcing the resumption of services, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko says scheduled partial blackouts would continue to manage electricity demand. The latest strikes followed an attack on Russia's Black Sea Fleet in Crimea. They appear to be part of a strategy to damage Ukraine's infrastructure in the run-up to winter. Power and water supplies were badly affected after Russia launched dozens of missiles targeting such facilities. Mr. Klitschko, however, says at one point 80% of the capital had been without water and hundreds of thousands of homes without electricity. Strikes were also recorded in the second city, Kharkiv, and in other cities, Dnipro and Zaporizhzhia in the southeast and central Vitsne and in the western Lviv region. As we reported earlier, European Energy Commissioner Kadri Simpson, in a show of support to Ukraine, had visited Kyiv, where she met with President Vladimir Zelensky. According to a statement from the office of the President of Ukraine, Mr. Zelensky thanked Ms. Simpson for her visit at a time when the energy infrastructure of the country is under massive attack by Russian drones and missiles. The two discussed further steps to ensure Ukraine's energy security and Russia's ongoing missile and drone attacks that have resulted in about 40% of Ukraine's entire energy infrastructure being seriously damaged. Mr. Zelensky spoke in detail about Ukraine's needs to restore energy and called on the European Union to play a coordinating role in attracting assistance from EU member states. Let's talk now to Maria Zolkina, a political analyst at the Ilko Kucherev Democratic Initiative Foundation. She joins us from Warsaw in Poland. Good morning to you, Maria. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Let's start off from where you are, because at the start, Poland was very much in the news because that would be the easiest place for many of those who were trying to flee to go. So there was a refugee crisis, there was a humanitarian crisis, and Poland struggled to cope. But today, we're not hearing so much about that. What's the situation like in Poland now, especially with Ukrainians who had to move?
Actually, Poland managed to cope with this issue very good, and it was done even without direct financial support from the European Union budget. This is one of the issues between Polish government and Brussels, that Polish government so far didn't receive any specific funds for accommodation or for handling the issues with Ukrainian refugees. But as of now, according to the latest statistics, 70% of the people who are residing, Ukrainians who are residing right now in Poland have already found job. So they do not need any social payments or support from the government, let's say, and they are receiving the salaries which are comparable to what Polish people are receiving. So it's due to these tragic, let's say, developments, actually one of the myths in European Union that when Ukraine will join to the European Union, there will be a labor market crisis. This myth has disappeared as Poland proved. So Ukrainians are easily integrated. They are not relying on social payments from the government, and they are just finding their job and settling down. At the same time, according to the same statistics, like different public opinion polls, absolute majority of these people in Poland are still saying that they are going to come back to Ukraine.
Given that scenario, let's go back to Ukraine itself, which is where the conflict is actually happening. And the reports that we have indicate that the most recent attacks, the attacks in the last 1 week or so, have been mainly targeted at water and energy infrastructure. And for those of us who don't live in Europe, but we travel, we know that this is very close to winter, and winter is fast approaching. What's the situation like back there? Can you give us any kind of idea of what's going on back there in terms of how people are coping with the damage to infrastructure and the repairs where possible?
So when it comes to what people do, you will find out that people are just preparing for winter without heating and normal water supply and electricity. So power banks is something you cannot find right now easily in Ukraine, and people are just transmitting it from abroad to our relatives in Ukraine or to the people in different institutions. Diesel generators, for instance, some gas balance, whatever what can allow people organize themselves. It's very deficit, let's say, products on the market. When it comes to specific damages, so as of now, up to 40% of Ukrainian energy and other critical infrastructure for water and heating and electricity supplies, they are not destroyed but seriously damaged. And the days before yesterday, it was announced by the largest electricity company in Ukraine that they already are short of specific equipment to replace that part of, let's say, equipment which was damaged. And yesterday, 12 countries all around the world, both from Middle East, European Union, and US as well, they have announced that they are sending this specific equipment to make repairment possible for critical infrastructure. And the third important issue is that before these attacks, which started on October 10, and which are fully recognized even by the Russian president that they're doing it precisely and consciously, Ukrainians had launched not forceful but obligatory evacuation of people, for instance, from Donetsk region, which was deprived of water and electricity supplies for several months already. And this model of evacuation to the, let's say, more safer or regions with less problems, like in the west, in the northwest, this evacuation might be launched in other regions, like in Kharkiv, in Mykolaiv region, which is constantly being shelled, and even in Kyiv region, as officials yesterday told that people from Kyiv region, it's not from Kyiv, but from Kyiv province, they might be evacuated exactly because the lack of electricity might be really a serious problem during the winter time.
Let's. I left this out of your introduction when I introduced you. You're head of regional security and conflict studies at the institute that I mentioned at the start of the program. So I want to talk about this broad conflict. as it were. When it started, the Russians certainly, possibly the allies also certainly did not expect that almost 9 months later we would still be talking about this conflict. And it doesn't look to be any closer to resolution. But one of the good things that came out of it was the Black Sea Grain Initiative, by which Ukraine was able to export a lot of the grain that it had produced and harvested and stored in the course of last year ahead of this conflict. Nobody knew the conflict then was coming. But now the Russians are saying they've suspended their participation in this. Do you think there's cause for worry here, especially if ships, as we are told, are still going through because of a separate agreement the Ukrainians have reached with the United Nations and Turkey? Is there potential for damage, for attack on what are essentially non-military vessels?
Actually, yes. So Russia didn't fully withdraw, but just, let's say, stop temporarily, as they say, participation in this grain deal, and mainly as to put it in a broader context. This is the signal that they cannot, participate in a political deal about more or less acceptable level of safety and security for commercial vessels in the Black Sea region. Simply saying, it's like the signal that they might again start striking Ukrainian facilities in the ports, which of course might include some kind of shellings on the commercial or civilian vessels. So that's why it's part of a broader game, which we are observing on the side of the Russian Federation for a couple of months already. Their primary goal was to make the narrow, very specific grain deal to make it a broader political deal about temporary ceasefire, to regroup Russian army, for instance. They failed with that kind of, let's say, political trick. But as of now, they are offering, actually, they are sending the signals that they are so-called ready, as they say, for negotiations, but at the same time, they are withdrawing even from very specific and very narrow deal, which were successful at that time. We think that their goal is to make international vessels scared again about entering Ukrainian ports, because if Russia doesn't participate in this deal temporarily or constantly, they cannot guarantee that they will not strike against these vessels. And of course, international insurance companies will not give insurances to these commercial vessels, and as a result, there will be again shortage of wheat on international markets, as it was already in the spring of 2022.
Before I let you go, I want to ask about something you mentioned at the start of the program, the start of this interview, rather, when you talked about the EU and Poland, and how Poland has had to cope with the humanitarian situation in spite of not receiving funds. Ukraine has been the recipient of funds from the US and the UK, principally, and then to a lesser level from a couple of other people. But both countries, the UK and the US, one is doing elections, that's the US, and the other one has just got a new prime minister whose remit is economic. Do you think, Ukrainians have a cause to be anxious, partly because in both countries, economic matters have now taken the center stage, and perhaps they might not be quite as robust in their participation in giving Ukraine aid as they were before now. In the case of the US, the Republicans have said, look, if we win Congress, it's not going to be a business as usual. We're not going to give a blank check to Ukraine.
We expect that there might be some changes in terms of procedures, how funds are flowing to Ukraine and how they are checked, for instance. But I don't see any evidence, even regarding these statements on the side of Republicans, that the general amount of financial or military support to Ukraine will be significantly decreased, or even what to say about to stop this support. Ukraine has always benefited from bipartial support, both from Republican and party and the Democrats Party in the US. And as of now, if there is a problem with, let's say, more controls and checks, I think that the Ukrainian government is absolutely open for that, as well as expert organizations which are very active, I mean NGOs which are very active in Ukraine, and they control these funds even much better than the donors do. And UK as well. So UK is, I would say, really the fundamental partner of Ukraine at this moment. And in contrast even to the US, they are even much stronger in their line to support Ukraine financially and, first of all, militarily, to make it defend its territory.
Indeed. Maria Zolkina, head of Regional Security and Conflict Studies at the Elko Kucherov Democratic Initiative Foundation. Thank you for your time this morning. Definitely not too long from now, we'll be back with you again to take a look at where we are with this very grim situation. But for now, please stay safe. Thank you for your time this morning. After the break, Chinese envoy calls for solutions satisfying all parties' concerns at UN Black Sea Grain Initiative Conference. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Lots of solidarity and support has been pouring in for Ukraine this time. French President Emmanuel Macron told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that France would help his country get through the winter. According to a readout of a call released by the Élysée Palace, Mr. Macron said France would strengthen Ukraine's anti-air defense capabilities as well as repair and restore its energy infrastructure. Mr. Macron says he agreed with Mr. Zelensky to hold an international conference in Paris on December the 13th to support Ukraine's civilians through the winter period. The two presidents also agreed to organize a bilateral conference on December the 12th to rally support from French companies. Both presidents also discussed Russia's decision to back out of an agreement that guaranteed safe passage for ships carrying vital grain exports. They also spoke about the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine, Turkey, and the United Nations have agreed not to plan for any ship movements in the Black Sea grain corridor today. That's according to a statement released by the UN Secretariat at the Joint Coordination Center in Istanbul. According to the statement, the United Nations and Turkish teams had carried out 36 inspections aboard outbound vessels. They attempted to inspect another 2 vessels, but the process was cut short because of issues related to fumigated cargo. The inspection reports would be shared with Ukrainian and Russian delegations. And China's deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, Zheng Shuang, has called for a solution satisfying all parties' concerns at a conference of the UN Security Council on Black Sea Grain Initiative issues. Mr. Shuang said the initiative is an important grain export arrangement reached between the UN, Russia, and Ukraine after rounds of negotiations, and that has brought hope to millions of hunger-stricken people. But Mr. Geng noted that in the nearly 4 months of implementation, the initiative has allowed more than 400 ships to bring over 9.5 million tons of Ukrainian grain to the rest of the world, playing a positive role in averting surging food prices. China calls on all parties to continue their communication and try to re-establish mutual trust until they find a solution that satisfies all parties' concerns. Mr. Geng also noted that dialogue and negotiations are the only practical ways to resolve the Ukraine crisis. The Cold War mentality, group politics, separation, confrontation, or isolation will not bring peace. And Russian President Vladimir Putin says Kyiv should provide, quote, real guarantees that it would not use the Black Sea corridor created as part of an Istanbul grain deal for its military activities. He was speaking with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in a phone conversation as both discussed the circumstances that could convince Moscow to return to its own commitments under the agreement. Russia indefinitely suspended its participation in the deal following last week's massive drone attack on its naval base in the Crimean port city of Sevastopol. Some of the naval drones launched allegedly used the Black Sea grain corridor's security zone to close in on their targets, according to the Russian military. Mr. Putin added that Russia would only consider reopening this corridor if given the guarantee. He also pointed out that part of the deal that involved lifting restrictions on Russia's own agricultural and fertilizer exports had never been implemented. Let's talk now to Laddie Williams of our business desk. Laddie, morning. It's all about the grain deal here on the news. But even as that is going on, Russia and Iran, two of the names in that, to sign a free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union.
Yeah,
this is not to be confused with the European Union.
Exactly. And if there's any country that's gifted at, evading sanctions, it's definitely Iran.
They've been doing it for a long time.
They've been doing it for a long time. So obviously we've seen Russia and Iran have been trade buddies, for a while now. Their trade level got about 36% up, this year, because they've been doing a lot of swaps and trades in this season. So they're moving it a step further now to take out any kind of barrier to, trade between both countries. So they're also looking at getting the Eurasian Economic Bloc into this to sign that agreement so that they can have, free trade arrangements between Iran, Russia, and, those countries that include Kyrgyzstan, Belarus, Kazakhstan, all those Eurasian countries. So it's at the end of the day, they're trying to build as much partners, trade partners as possible. And we know Russia now, the oil, the caps, the price caps are coming. So they're trying to find as many outlets as possible, through other countries where they can get, some of their, most of
alternate
their oil.
outlets.
Exactly. So they can get their oil and gas out. So they're also planning, swaps, oil and gas swaps between, Russia and Iran. So they can easily just, get their oil out, even though, unfriendly nations try to cap their prices. So at the end of the day, it's business.
It is.
Yeah.
Not personal. Now, but again, I said earlier at the start, I said that it's all about the Ukraine grain deal initiative. Now, insurance, which we talked about when this was about to happen, for the grain shipments have been cut.
Yeah.
What was that about?
So basically, we know once they signed that, grain deal, the insurance were back, in business. Now there's certainty that the shipments, the exports would actually leave Ukraine without, risk. But now that Russia has suspended, their participation in the deal, so the insurers are looking at it like, okay, you know what? It's getting risky. It's now a risky environment. Just yesterday, Monday, the cover was up about 1%, but yesterday, we saw it up more, about 1.5% for a shipment.
Right.
That's for the premium cover there. So they're seeing already that it's not looking
looking too good or safe.
Too good
indeed.
for now. So that will cost the insurers more. So they're now taking a step back, trying to watch how things play out, see Russia's next move, to know if they can still continue to actually give cover for exports leaving Ukraine, talking about the shipments, at this time for food. But at the end of the day, we know the world needs, we need most of these grains, and we're still watching. Everybody's watching. The prices are already reacting.
Yes, because that was going to be my next point, because the prices are going up, and what you've just said about insurance means that the prices are going to go up even further, because somebody's got to pay for this.
Somebody's going to pay, and, the insurers have to protect themselves at this time. So that's why they're cutting cover.
This doesn't look too good. How are the markets reacting to all of this? I know that sometimes they go very quickly to react. Quickly. Sometimes they're not as quick because they're still trying to get all the information.
Exactly.
But what's it like this midway?
So for the U.S. markets, now we know all investors there are focused on the FOMC meeting. That's their focus. Right now everyone is expecting that 75 basis points rate hike.
Minimum.
So, but it'll be a miracle if we see less
than that.
less than that. But going forward, investors are still expecting some kind of 50 basis points cut back. Not sure, but we're seeing the markets react positively to that. But the U.S. markets closed negative yesterday, but checking the futures this morning, it's already in the green, showing that investors are already positioning. I'm sure they've priced that hike in already. But the oil markets too also, coming up a bit. We're seeing Brent at $94 this morning, trying to inch back to that $100 level.
Bracket, yeah.
All eyes on that level. But at the end of the day, China is still a big mover, in that market. Depends on how, things play out with China, talking about their output and business activity at this point. So every investor right now is on edge, watching. No market is safe from volatility right now.
At this point, we'll keep our eyes only midweek. We've still got two days, two more days, and it might be different by the end of the week. Thanks, Laddie.
Thank you
for that. Let's tell you that, of course, that Laddie Williams and the crew will be on right after this show on Business Morning, and then later on in the afternoon on Business Incorporated. Thanks again, Laddie. As fighting intensified around Ukraine's eastern city of Bakhmut as late as last night, some residents were still refusing to leave. Bakhmut, one of Ukraine's eastern Donetsk region cities, is now seeing some of the heaviest fighting as Russian forces persist in attempts to make advances. Amidst the constant booming of mortar shells, residents queue up on a chilly morning for aid at a collection center in the city center. A small scuffle breaks out between an aid volunteer and local resident who tries to obtain a ration of pet food. Ukrainian armored vehicles speed past the ruins of destroyed buildings throughout the city's streets, which are almost deserted. Local resident Lyubina Kovalenko says while she is afraid of mortar strikes, she is still bound to her home city. The town of Bakhmut has been the target of Russia's armed forces in their slow advance through the Donetsk region since taking the key industrial towns of Lysychansk and Severodonetsk in June and July. Let's talk now to Mr. Roy Ohideve, fellow of the International Institute of Professional Security. He joins us from Abuja. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. It's always an opportunity.
Let's begin with what we've been talking mostly about this morning, the Russian-Ukraine grain initiative, what is otherwise known as the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And I'll ask you already, you probably heard our business correspondent Laddie Williams say that the insurance premiums are rising now for shipments out of that corridor. That's in spite of the fact that the United Nations, Ukraine, and Turkey are trying to continue with the shipments, but without Russian participation. From a security perspective for crews on those ships, for the ships themselves, for ancillary infrastructure and all of that, and with what I've just mentioned about insurance, this is dangerous territory in terms of its security implications, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. You know, last time we spoke on these issues before the agreements were reached, and I and you were here, we talked about possibilities of reaching those agreements and opening those waterways. Now, if you look at the insurance hike and the predominant cost of grain at the end market, and if you look at the safety of the ships and the personnel on the water, you begin to put together a lot of what we discussed concerning the war and the battle. You know, I always tell people, because as an ex-military man, I understand what it is to have physical battles and non-physical battles in a war. Now, definitely, there must be further investigations to see who is still pulling what strings, because a lot of agreements, consensus, and postulations are going on. A lot of policies are being restructured behind the scenes, and everybody's looking for who it will favor the most. So we need to be looking at the insurance companies. We need to be looking at who is discussing with who from the Russian side and understand the trajectory.
There is, as you mentioned, you are an ex-military man, and that's where I was going to go next. The battlefront or the battle lines themselves. Russia says that its Black Sea Fleet was attacked last weekend, and it says Ukraine did it with equipment that was supplied by Britain. That's the accusation. In return, or in retaliation, it has gone after Ukraine's energy infrastructure in particular, and we both know that winter is coming. So if they're without lights, if they're without water, they're without heating, and all of that, that will not only affect the military population, it will affect the civilian population. Is this sound military strategy, do you think?
Yes, it is. But, you know, one thing that so many of us are failing to understand is called resilience. The resilience of the people. You have seen in certain communities, people are refusing to leave. And once they refuse to leave, it's difficult for Russia to throw all out aggression and not to incur humanitarian crime, you know. So also with the destruction of infrastructure, if you blow down a bridge, the military is also bothered with some internal arrangements to rebuild the bridge. If you blow down the power and energy supply, definitely there are recuperation plans on ground. And you can also hear on VR News that UK, they are also planning to help Ukraine to build back their energy and all the structures that were broken down. So the speed at rebuilding and the re-strategization and the strategy to protect further destruction is the ongoing war.
The Ukrainians, while the Russians are going after the energy infrastructure in Ukraine, the Ukrainians on their own side have been preparing, we are told, for this big push into Kherson. Kherson, of course, is the biggest city that was completely occupied by Russia in the early part of the conflict, and Ukraine wants it back. The Russians say they have evacuated most of the city, so it is empty virtually. In view of what you just said now about incurring civilian damage, that will not be a consideration in Kherson if the Ukrainians attack it and it is empty, and the Russians themselves know that it is empty, so everybody can do anything that they like. Am I right?
Yes, definitely that will come into play, but we must not forget that there is the possibility of neighboring towns. Like if you evacuate everybody from Abuja, definitely they will fall into neighboring towns. And if you are going to fight against a people, then you should be thinking of the after effects and aftermath of investigation. So if they have evidence and they can securing those evidence to show that they are not attacking civilian communities, then they can be able to sail through that. But mind you, also that missiles and trajectories of bullets and bombs can be redirected. So we don't know for sure what is on ground, except what we have in the news. And if they are sure of what they are saying, then they can begin to take such military steps. But in a foremost observation, it could also expose them, because you remember that some of the defeats that Russia has suffered is because they made advances without covering where they are taking over properly with enough personnel, and that gives a lacuna for a counter-attack. So it's a dicey situation for them, definitely on another man's land.
Let's look at that a little bit further. When you say it's dicey, the Russians are seeking support, if you like, from previously unexpected sources. I mean, this morning it's been made clear that the Iranians are expected to supply The Ukrainian intelligence is saying Iranians are going to supply them with drones. And the previous drones that the Ukrainians have, the Russians have used are said to have come from Iran. Of course, Iran has denied this, and the Russians have denied that as well. But if the Iranians are known to have these highly effective drones and drone systems, which are capable of causing tremendous damage, as we have seen in Ukraine. So this introduces a kind of dimension to it that is not there. If the Russians get hold of this Ukrainian drones, Iranian drones and missiles, the Ukrainians say they've got no air defense. So these drones are going to have it easy, so to speak. So it's basically like the Ukrainians are going to be sitting ducks.
Okay, now let me make something clear here. The Iranians are very hard-knock countrymen. Okay, so if we look at how the Russians are going to get these drones, we ask ourselves at what cost. So at what cost will Russia get these drones from Iran, or are getting these drones from Iran, according to intelligence? That's one. The second angle you need to look at is that the world knows that Iran has these drones, and Ukraine is saying we have no counter-emergency to secure us against the drones. Now, let me ask a question. There are enemies of Iran, and these enemies of Iran are not sleeping. They already know that Iran has these drones. So I want to give an assurance here, like a prediction, that before those drones become full-blown equipment for
we seem to have lost Mr. Roy Ohidebe there. But the point, of course, is generally made. I want to thank you for his time on the program this morning. But still to come, Ukrainian volunteers craft candles to keep troops warm as energy crisis worsens. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The streets and boulevards of the Russian-held port of Kherson in southern Ukraine are now virtually empty as Ukrainian forces close in. Many shops and businesses have been shuttered, and at a jetty on the banks of the Dnipro River, a handful of people board a ferry to live. With Ukrainian forces advancing to the north and east of the strategic city, Russian-installed officials there have evacuated tens of thousands of civilians in recent weeks. Only a few remain, and some expressed frustration at not knowing what lies ahead. Compounding the uncertainty are claims and counterclaims by both sides in the 8-month-old conflict, which Russia calls a special military operation, that a nearby dam could be destroyed, potentially triggering floods downstream. Ukrainian armed forces have moved closer to the city after regaining some of the territory lost earlier on in the conflict, and say that Russia has been reinforcing the region to defend against a possible assault on Kherson. Kyiv denies it plans to attack the dam, a 30-meter-high, 3.2-kilometer-long barrier, and unleash a reservoir the size of the Great Salt Lake across southern Ukraine, inundating towns and villages. Serial entrepreneur Oleg Tinkov has renounced his Russian citizenship, saying he doesn't want to be associated with, quote, fascism or collaborate with, quote, killers. In an Instagram post published, the 54-year-old founder of Tinkov Bank wrote, "I decided to renounce my Russian citizenship after Russia's invasion of independent Ukraine. I am against this war and the killing of peaceful people." Mr. Tinkov, whose startup digital credit card company TCS Group, holding TCSQL, grew to become one of Russia's largest financial institutions, has been an outspoken critic of President Vladimir Putin and his decision to pour thousands of troops into neighboring Ukraine. He was forced to sell his 35% stake in TCS, Tinkov's bank's parents, to Russian metals magnate Vladimir Putin in April, following a string of comments against what Moscow called its special military operation in Ukraine. Mr. Tinkov said an original Instagram post published earlier in the week with a picture of a certificate renouncing his citizenship as of October the 26th had mysteriously disappeared. He is believed to now live in London, where he underwent years of treatment for leukemia. He says he now has no business interests in Russia. In the sports, Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin has called on the support of fellow Shanghai Cooperation Organization members to fight back against the banning of the nation's athletes across sport. He claimed that such ban is destroying the principles of Olympism and that Russian athletes face the strongest pressure from the collective West. Mr. Mishustin told CSO Council of Heads of Government meeting that member states are unanimous that sports competitions should remain an effective and accessible tool for building trust and mutual understanding between peoples. The SCO is hoping to create an association of sports organizations in the region too, as put forward by President Vladimir Putin at the latest SCO summit last month in Samarkand. This group was formed in 2001, starting with China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. The World Curling Federation, the International Ski and Snowboard Federation, and the International Bobsleigh and Skeleton Federation have received full membership fees from their respective Russian national federations, in spite of the country's athletes being banned by the trio. The IBSF claims that although Russians cannot compete in its events, it has not suspended the Russian Bobsleigh Federation, so insists it is entitled to receive the payment. The RBF expects to pay its dues for the next season as well, with the payment to be made in mid-2023 during the next IBSF Congress. The FIS has the same reasoning, but its membership fee is much higher as it partially corresponds to voting power within the organization. All three governing bodies followed the International Olympic Committee's recommendations to ban Russian and Belarusian athletes and officials following the invasion of Ukraine. And finally on the program, Kyiv families regularly meet in a shared space in central Kyiv to make trench candles for the Ukrainian army as the missile-induced energy crisis impacts troops and civilians likewise. This is fueled by a volunteer initiative in Kyiv called Ukrainian Space Intelligentsia, which uses wax, cartons, and empty pet food cans as raw materials. Organizer Nino Nazarova says her initiative has delivered more than 3,000 multifunctional candles to Ukrainian trenches in the south and east. Paulina Shermat is one of the regular volunteers and says that the more missiles rain on Ukraine, the higher the motivation to help the army becomes. Many children and parents have joined the handicraft sessions over the past 2 months. Like Gordy, who says he is less frightened now, he is used to the war. Courage in the face of much adversity. That's how we wrap up this morning's program. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akeredoluale. There are updates throughout the day, but particularly in the world today at 5 o'clock. But for now, do have yourselves a great day ahead. Good morning.